Well, hey all, welcome back to Miss Raga's Art Room. Here we are, we're to the finishing stages. We've finished all of our additive sculpture, we've finished our beautiful carving, right, our subtractive sculpture, we've picked our textures if we left in carved or additive textures, and now we're to the smoothing, right, we're to the finishing elements. Because one thing we need to understand about clay is unlike cookies in the oven, right? We put bumpy cookies in the oven and they smooth out nice, right? That butter and sugar melts. Not with clay. Exactly how you see this surface is exactly how it's going to fire. And in particular, sharp or rough edges will be like razor sharp, okay? So we need to do some really good smoothing so that we have a wonderful usable object that's easy to drink out of, or even if it's decorative, isn't gonna like scratch our furniture or things like that. Okay, so first step is the initial smoothing. You're gonna use your rubber tools, okay, to literally kind of like scrub and pet the surface of the clay. And you keep cleaning it off on the tablecloth or a piece of paper towel. And there are lots of different ones, lots of different shapes and angles, so you can get into and around crevices, in and around edges, those nooks and crannies, okay, and really do a good initial smooth. All right, so this is kind of getting the big stuff first, the big tool marks. You just kind of like work back and forth. Almost treat it like a paintbrush. Okay, and just working over the whole surface, particularly the outside. Don't worry so much about the inside. We're gonna do that with the big brush as the final smooth, okay? But your goal is to get the big tool marks, big fingerprints out. And remember, as our clay is drying, it is becoming more delicate. So we actually have to be more gentle with it as we work. All right, we'll take about a class period to do this initial smooth. You have to be patient with it. You have to take your time, really get in all the little edges. Oh, sorry guys, I was smoothing off screen. Getting all the little edges in that. Okay, lovely. So once we finish our initial smooth, we're gonna take about a class period to do that. We're gonna set these smoothing tools aside. And then we're gonna do our finished smooth. This is the final smooth we'll spend a day doing. And we're gonna work with a wet smooth and a brush smooth, okay? So we've got our brushes up front here. And the first smooth we're gonna start with is 5 to 10 minutes of smoothing the inside of our mug. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna get the bristles wet, and then you are going to strip most of the moisture out with your finger, right? The brush should feel damp on your hand, but not soggy wet. So once again, we dip, and then we strip the excess moisture out, right? If the clay is too wet, it actually makes your smoothing more difficult. And then you're gonna work with the brush on the inside, and you keep cleaning it off. You're gonna slowly work your way around with that damp brush and do your finished smooth work. Now this is just on the smooth interior surface, okay? In big areas. What you shouldn't do is you don't want to take, right, don't get lazy at this point. You've put way too much effort into this project at this point for you to start just like slopping water all over it, right? So you're not just taking this big brush and like gobbering water all over the surface. It's damp, okay? If you need to blot the excess off onto the tablecloth, and you really want to smooth the inside and your top edge in particular really well. Like I said, we're going to work 10 or so minutes just on the inside, right? Because this is where our liquid is going. Once the brush starts to like drag too much on the surface of the clay, that's when you know it's time to rinse the clay out of the bristles. Strip the extra moisture out, little dab, and go back to reworking. Okay, if you are getting like puddles on the inside of your clay, you are way too wet. It needs to be just, it's Goldilocks syndrome. It's just damp enough to give it a good glide. Okay, so we're gonna work the whole inside. Then we're gonna switch to the outside. You're probably gonna need your smaller brush at this point. Again, it's the same thing. Dip, and squeegee. Tap the excess water off. You're going to work with now your small brush over the whole exterior to smooth out any remaining finger or tool marks. Again, the brush shouldn't be like sopping wet. You're just using the brush to get enough glide. You should also be using the right size brush. If there's a detail area that's tricky to get into, that's what the tiny brushes are there for, right? That's what the tiny brushes are there for, so you can get into your carving marks, so you can get around detail edges, right? Again, what you shouldn't do is just take a gloppy wet brush over the surface and just smudge out your carving. That defeats the point of you doing all that beautiful carve work. So this is going to take time and patience. We're going to go over the whole surface and get a really beautiful finish. At the very end, okay, last 5-10 minutes of class, not even 10, last like 2 minutes of class probably, we're going to take our brush, the big brush, and the last place we'll smooth is we'll do the very bottom. And at this point you want to make sure when you set it back down, you're setting it on your dry piece of paper towel, okay, so that you're not getting any crumblies or anything into the wet surface area that we've just smoothed out. Right, and all we're doing is just giving enough moisture to the surface of the clay to get a little glide going. That's it. If your clay is so wet that it's like getting a sticky texture to it, you're using too much water. It's just enough that it gets a little guide. So again, dip the brush, strip the water out with your fingers, give it a little pat off on the tablecloth so it's not sopping wet, and then work that clay surface. Always gentle. Remember, you are either supporting with your non-dominant hand or it's resting flat on the table surface, right? We're not at this point leaning it on its edge or its side because we could crack the mug, and at this point I can't repair it, okay? All right, the last bit, once we're all dried to the surface before we take it down to the kiln room, is we're going to use one of our carvers to put our initials into the bottom. So I'm going to put my initials in. Remember, always clean your carver off as you're going, right, so you don't have all those little crispies and things sticking up. So clean it off on the tablecloth with your fingers. Okay, take a minute with the rubber smoother to just wipe up any kind of rough edges of that clay. You'll also, in addition to just your initials, you'll put your class period, so whatever that happens to be, you know, 2B or 4B or 1A, okay, you'll put that in there. So I always write sample, so I'll just put S for now. And then I think it's really nice to always put the month and year it was made. So in our case, it's going to be 2 and 20. And that way we know we completed this February of 2020. Okay, and once again, take your last little bit with the rubber tool that you're doing the carving with and just clean up any other areas. Make sure it's nice and deep enough. If you have to, right, take your little brush and just tuck and get rid of any of the extra crumbles. And once this is fully smoothed, I've got some more work to do. We've got our name carved. This is ready to go on down to the kiln room and be fired. All right, terrific. So you'll be joining me in our next videos to talk glazing once this is all fired. All right, thanks so much for joining me in the art room today. I'll see you soon in Miss Raga's art room.